Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Terp Family Fundamentals webinar series. My name is Danielle Walker. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Assistant Director in the Office of Family Engagement here at the University of Maryland. For those of you that are new, this webinar series is intended to help you become informed consultants on campus resources so that you can better support your Terps. Today, we're joined by staff in the Accessibility and Disability Services Office. Their office provides various accommodations for those who need them to be successful here at Maryland. I'm thrilled to have them here to share about their resources and how you can help support your Terp as they navigate the college experience. If you find you have questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to submit those via the Q&A feature. To access the Q&A feature, find the two conversation bubbles towards the bottom of your screen. It should also say Q&A. If you don't see that, you may need to click the three dots to expand your toolbar. To help us answer questions that the majority of you have, I ask that you use the upvote option. So within the Q&A feature, if you see a question that you'd also like the answer to, instead of typing that same question out, select the thumbs up icon. This is called an upvote, and we'll be prioritizing those questions with the most upvotes. Also, be sure to look at the answered tab as well for questions that have already been responded to, as well as responses to your own questions. We'll do our best to respond to as many questions as we can before the end of the webinar. Lastly, this webinar will be recorded and available following the session today. It'll be available on our Terp Family YouTube channel. And so refer to your confirmation email or the reminder email for our link to our YouTube channel. And with that, I will hand it over to Hannah. Thanks, everyone.
Hello, my name is Hannah Witchy. I use she, her pronouns. Please call me Hannah. I am a disability specialist with the Accessibility and Disability Service. And I'll allow Monica to introduce herself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Monica Eisenberg, and I am also a disability specialist here with Accessibility and Disability Services.
So Monica will be answering any questions that you have within the Q&A feature. Very grateful that she's here with us today. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. So first of all, I just want to thank you all for being here and for supporting your student and for supporting them in the way of coming to this presentation. That's so great. So first of all, let me make this work. Hold on. There we go. Okay. So the Accessibility and Disability Service, we provide reasonable accommodations to individuals with disabilities to ensure equal access to services, programs, and activities sponsored by the University of Maryland. So I have some figures here that are a little bit old, but in the 2021-2022 school year, we had about 3,000 students using accommodations, approximately 7% of the student body. That number has increased, but I don't have the current stats on that. And then we also had about 1,100 new students register as well that year, just to give you a general idea. So this is what our department looks like. We have a director, we have 2 assistant directors, we have 8 disability specialists. I'm one of them, Monica's one of them. And then we also have several units. So we have the testing office. We do have a dedicated testing office for our students. So we do run a testing center just for ADS students. We have the adaptive technology lab, and then we have alternates tech services. They primarily do make sure that students have audiobooks, versions of their text if they need that. We have communication access services. They primarily work with deaf and hard of hearing students. And then our note-taking unit to provide note-taking support for students who need that. So we facilitate accommodations in these areas. So we do academic coursework that includes testing, homework, lectures, labs, anything academic. We also do housing accommodations. We work directly with Res Life to manage those accommodations. And then we also do student employment accommodations. I believe everyone who registered for this event has your student is an undergraduate student, and this primarily applies for graduate students. But I want to make sure you're aware that we do that. So if your student wants to go to grad school, that they know that we would also do employment accommodations if they have a graduate assistantship. It can apply for undergraduate students as well, as there are some positions for undergraduate students here. So who is eligible for accommodations? any student with a documented disability. The disability is one or more physical or mental diagnoses that interfere with major life activities that last at least 6 to 8 weeks. So if someone has an injury, we're going to be asking, okay, is this an injury that would last 6 to 8 weeks or longer, or is this a short-term injury? In which case, we're very sympathetic, but we're not the right office to help with that. Students who are undergraduate students, graduate students, student employees, as I mentioned before, are eligible for accommodations if they have a disability. Here are some examples of disabilities that our students have. This is not a comprehensive list, but just to give you an idea. So ADHD, learning disabilities, mental health diagnoses, autism spectrum disorder, brain injuries, hearing and vision disabilities, physical and medical disabilities, chronic illness, mobility disabilities, hearing or vision disabilities, and temporary conditions like injuries, for example. Here is a breakdown. This is from the 2021-2022 school year, so it is a little bit old, but just to give you a general idea of the percentages of students who are registered with us. We do have the largest percentage is ADHD, followed by psychological disabilities. So you can see the breakdown. We've got learning disabilities at 11%, and then neurological 4.9, and so on. So it's a much smaller percentage after ADHD and psychological disabilities. So why are accommodations important? So first of all, access. Access is so important. You know that your student is very capable and is someone who needs to be out in the world and doing the things that they want to do. So, I believe that students with disabilities are some of the most innovative people out there. If you take, a physical disability, if you're in a wheelchair, you are going to be a creative person because you have to innovate every step of the way, every single thing. If you want to make a sandwich, you're going to have to innovate to figure out how you're going to do that in a world that is not designed for a person in a wheelchair. If you have ADHD, your brain works differently than all the neurotypical people out there, and we need you out doing whatever it is you want to do because you are going to be the person who's going to come up with things that no one else would come up with. It's really, really important that our students get access to the education that they want so that they can achieve all of those things. We have really amazing students with disabilities here that are going to really contribute to the world. And then at the end of the day, we have a legal responsibility to provide access to education. So everyone in my office really cares about this stuff because this is what we do. And then, most of the instructors out there also want to provide access. But every now and then you come up across someone who doesn't want to, and, we hope to educate them so that they understand why it's important. But even if they don't understand, it doesn't matter. They still have to provide accommodations because we're legally obligated to. So here are just some examples of accommodations. This is by no means a comprehensive list, but just some ideas of things that we commonly provide. Additional testing time, less distracting space for testing, alternate technology for testing, ability to type responses, breaks during exams. In the classroom, we often provide audio recordings of lectures, copies of instructor slides, preferential seating, or a sign language interpreter. Some other examples, paratransit. Paratransit is a bus that takes students as close to door as possible on campus, which is really important because if you have visited our lovely campus, it is not always the easiest to access because it is so large and hilly. So we do have that service. Alternate versions of text, advanced access to assignments, periodic absences, and extended due dates. So let's talk about high school versus college laws. So in high school, or just K through 12 in general, students are protected by IDEA, so Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So these laws are requires schools to provide free and appropriate public education that's geared towards specially designed instruction at no cost to the parents to meet the unique needs of the child with a disability. So this law is very geared toward a success orientation, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. In college, students are protected by Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. So this mandates equal access to education programs that receive federal dollars. The ADA, the Americans with Disability Act Amendment of 2008, prohibits discrimination based on disability. So the way that we prevent discrimination is by providing accommodations. Now, that is an access orientation. So this is important. So success versus access. So in high school, students are provided accommodations to ensure that they succeed. And then in college, we're ensuring that you have access. So in college, students have an equal ability as their peers to fail or succeed. Now, this might sound harsh, but it's actually a really wonderful thing because it means that when students graduate, they achieved all of that success on their own. They didn't receive any special treatment. They received access to their education. So let's talk more about high school versus college. So in high school, accommodations are provided via an IEP or a 504 plan. And then in college, students, they request an accommodation letter to be sent to each professor every semester. In high school, teachers have access to an IEP or 504 plan and any disability evaluations completed. In college, professors don't need to know any of that. They just need to know what the accommodations are. They legally can't ask for a disability diagnosis. So they shouldn't be asking that. The student, some students like to share their disability information with their instructors, and that's perfectly fine if they're comfortable with that and they want to do that, but they absolutely don't need to. Instructors have to provide the accommodations and they can't ask for the disability diagnosis. But it's also good to know that they're not going to have all that background information like a teacher would in high school. In high school, students may be allowed modifications in the curriculum, testing, and in the grading process in order to achieve success. So once again, that's success mindset as opposed to college, where accommodations must be reasonable. They can't fundamentally change a course curriculum. So that's really important. We cannot fundamentally alter a course or an assignment, as opposed to high school where they can do that to ensure success. In high school, the teacher or school professional may alert parents or caregivers that support is needed. A lot of the time, that's how students are diagnosed, maybe when they're, could be when they're older, could be, in first grade or something like that. Teachers will notice things and they will let the parents or caregiver know. In college, students are responsible for self-advocating, identifying themselves as a person with a disability to ADS. Typically, no one is going to alert us that the student might have a disability except for the student. In high school, the school might provide an assessment for disability. So they might actually do the disability testing, by a school professional, as opposed to college where students have to seek that out themselves. A lot of the time they're already coming in with documentation that they had from high school, but if they are trying to get a new diagnosis, they're going to have to go and seek out that from the appropriate professional and bring that to us. In high school, tutoring, study support, or additional instruction may be provided as an accommodation, but in college, those services are available to all students. Tutoring services, writing support, instructor office hours, any student can use those services. Now, when we talk about access versus success, in college, it's not that students don't have any support to get success, it's that those services are available for other students as well. So they can still achieve success, getting extra support by accessing those services. In high school, if a student is unable to attend class, home supports may be provided. So if they have, an extended illness or something like that that prevents them from coming to school at all, the state is legally obligated to provide education to those students, and the school will have to provide home support or something like that. It's different in college. You don't have to go to college, and you don't have to be in college at all times. So if a student is not able to attend class, they might have to withdraw until their symptoms subside. We hate, that's kind of a last resort. We hate it when that happens. But it's, ultimately for my students, if they're not doing well with their health, then, what I want for them is to, okay, take some time off, figure out your health, and then when you come back, you'll be able to get that education that you deserve, that you really weren't able to get when you were not doing well. In high school, parents or caregivers have access to student records and can participate in the accommodation process. In college, parents or caregivers don't have access to those student records without the student's consent. The parent or caregiver typically advocates on the behalf of the student in high school, but in college, students advocate for themselves. Now, with the student's permission, parents are welcome to attend meetings. They're welcome to give us information, but we can't share information. So say your student is struggling, you're welcome to reach out to me or their disability specialist to say, hey, like this is what's going on. And that gives me information. So then I can reach out to the student to offer support. However, I can't tell you as the parent, let's say, oh, well, this is what they've been doing. I can't tell you that. I can't tell you if they have been accessing their accommodations or anything like that. They are, legally an adult and they have those privacy protections. However, with the student's permission, I can, have you can be attending the meeting. If you do want to attend meetings with a student, self-advocacy is so important. So what I recommend that you do is kind of take a step back, let the student speak for themselves, and then you can offer information in addition if they are not providing all the information that you think is relevant. So how to register for accommodations. So first, the student self-identifies themselves to us. So once again, that's really important. We're not going to know unless they come to us. And the way they do that is they access our registration application, which can be found on our website. And in that application, they'll be providing a self-report. They'll also be able to upload any documentation. That also, just so you know, can be provided later. That's fine as well. After they've completed the application, they're going to call the ADS front desk to schedule an appointment. That appointment will be virtual. Then they're going to attend a 1-hour registration appointment with myself or Monica or one of our colleagues, and you're going to discuss how that disability impacts them academically. After that, accommodations are established and directional information is provided. Sometimes that happens during the meeting and sometimes that happens after the meeting. It depends on the accommodations. Students then can contact their assigned disability specialist at any time, so that person would be the person you had that meeting with is your assigned disability specialist, and they can contact us via email so that we can adjust accommodations or answer any questions. So let's talk about documentation requirements. Documentation is one of those, we hate it. It's really annoying. It can create a barrier that we don't want to be there for our students. However, we have to have documentation. So let's talk about what we require. So preferably we get that documentation prior to the registration meeting. If their appointment is coming up and they still haven't submitted it, they should still attend their meeting. It needs to be relevant, it needs to be current. And when I say current, it really depends on the diagnosis. So some diagnoses, if you have, a broken leg, a concussion, something like that, it's definitely going to need to be really, really current, because if you had a broken leg 5 years ago, we're going to expect that your leg is healed. If it's something like autism, then if you have documentation that's really old, we're probably going to be able to say, okay, you probably still have autism and we might not need any other documentation if the documentation you provide answers all our questions. Documentation does need to be completed by an appropriate professional who, can diagnose that disability. The type of documentation really varies. It's really hard for me to tell you exactly what documentation you need because it does depend on the diagnosis. But some of the examples might be an IEP, a 504 plan, a psychological evaluation, or one of our ADS verification forms. Those are on our website, so those typically meet our requirements. Something like an IEP or 504 plan may or may not meet our requirements depending on how thorough it is and what the disability is. But the disability specialist will be able to evaluate that and let the student know if they need additional documentation. We're also often able to provide temporary accommodations if we have some documentation, but we need to, get additional documentation as well. So implementing accommodations. Each semester, a student is going to request that their accommodation letter be sent to an instructor. It's a pretty simple process that can be completed through our portal. They just kind of check a bunch of boxes and hit submit, and their instructors will all get a copy of their letter. So this letter, when they send it, it indicates that they're eligible for those accommodations, but not necessarily that they want to use it, and it doesn't necessarily have all the information needed about the logistics of implementing it. So after that, they're going to talk with their instructor and discuss that implementation. So this is when the student's going to say, yes, I do want to use all of these accommodations or some of these accommodations, and let's talk about the logistics. Like, for example, with testing, they may be able to, implement those accommodations in the classroom, or the instructor might say, you know what, go to ADS to take your test. So this is where those logistics will be discussed. The student is responsible to inform us of any problems or questions or concerns in a timely manner. We can help a lot more if they tell us sooner rather than later, and we won't know unless they tell us. Accommodations can't be applied retroactively, but there's no deadline to apply for accommodations. So if a student applies for accommodations right now, it will be effective for the rest of the semester, but they can't go back in time and get extra time on a test that already happened, for example. And there's no deadline. So some instructors will tell students at the beginning of the year, hey, you need to give me your accommodation letter in the first 2 weeks. I think that instructors, when they do that, they're trying to be helpful, saying like, oh, get your accommodation letters in so that we can get started with your accommodation. But it can be misinterpreted, or maybe the instructor doesn't know this, but students can submit their letter anytime during the semester. Accommodations might be needed anytime. There's no deadline. So let's talk about housing accommodations. The process for applying for housing kind of overlaps with the process for academic accommodations, but it's not quite the same. So once again, they're going to identify themselves to ADS. They need to complete that same registration application. If they've already done it for academic accommodations, they don't need to do it twice. They also are going to complete a disability housing accommodation form. And this is where they're going to say, hey, these are the accommodations I'm requesting, and this is why. They'll also submit documentation. Typically, that's going to be our disability housing documentation form that a provider completes, and they will submit that with the application, or they can submit it later. After that, we will review, so their disability specialist will review the application, and then we'll follow up. So that might be a meeting, or maybe they can just go ahead and send a decision. Maybe they need to ask some follow-up questions over email, but the disability specialist will inform them of what needs to happen next. If accommodations are approved, Res Life is informed, and Res Life determines specific placement. If a student disagrees with the decision that was made, they can always provide more information to their disability specialist, and we're always happy to review those requests again. So here are just some examples. This is by no means comprehensive, once again, but just some examples of housing accommodations. A single dorm, that could be a traditional single or a suite single. There are a bunch of different bathroom accommodations, like being, having close proximity to a bathroom. A private use bathroom, which is like where you can close the door and lock it, but other people have access to it as well. A privately shared bathroom, so maybe that's shared by 4 to 6 people. And then an in-room bathroom, which would be completely private. Air conditioning, some students come in and don't realize some of our dorms don't have air conditioning, and it does get really hot here. So students who have asthma that's severe or something like that, they might need to get an air conditioning accommodation. Elevator access, entry floor level, an accessible bathroom as grab bar, shower chair, etc. And then an emotional support animal. Emotional support animals are different than service animals. Service animals are specifically trained to perform a certain function. Emotional support animals are typically for students who have like a psychological disability and really benefit from having an animal with them. And you don't need to get them certified or anything like that. You just need to get a letter from your provider explaining that you need a service animal and why, and then we will evaluate if we're able to add that as an accommodation. Emotional support animals are just for the dorm room and not for academic buildings. Here are some additional support services on campus. So there's the counseling center. They're really great for providing therapy, and they can also connect students with outside providers that are covered by their insurance and meet any preferences they have in a counselor. There's also the tutoring services, which are really great. There's Succeeds, which is an ADHD clinic. And then Cigna, which is for neurodivergent students. Typically, most of the students in the program are on the autism spectrum, but they don't have to be. And I have the URLs for those services. There were a couple people who asked questions about Succeeds and Cigna ahead of time. And I just want to say that those programs are not affiliated with ADS. While, I do recommend them, they're not affiliated. So I don't have a lot of information about those programs. But I know that people who have been in the programs really, really love them. And I do, recommend them if your student has ADHD or autism. Okay, so now it's time for questions. I'm first going to address the questions that were asked ahead of time. Some of them I answered within the presentation, so I'm going to answer some of the ones that I didn't answer within it. And then you can also feel free to write down the contact information for ADS if you like. So someone asked if we help with getting GRE accommodations. So the answer to that is yes, we do. And any standardized tests like the Praxis, the MCAT, LSAT, we do help with those things. And what we do is for the GRE specifically, there's in the paperwork that the student has to complete to apply for accommodations. One section is called the COE, or the Certificate of Eligibility. And that is for us to complete. So what the student needs to do is email their disability specialist and send that form over and say, hey, can you complete the COE for me? Just a few things to note. Accommodations outside of UMD are not in our control or within our expertise. So sometimes students will have a lot of questions about accommodations for the GRE, and I don't necessarily have the answers to those questions, and they should contact ETS. But I'm happy to send them the link to the email address. There are limits to what I can help with as far as that goes. Another thing to note is that ETS is pretty strict about documentation being within the last 5 years. ADS, we're a lot less strict about how old documentation is, but ETS is pretty strict about it. So if your student has an evaluation that's older than 5 years, then and they want to take one of those standardized tests to get into graduate school, they may need to get reevaluated. So just something to think about. I did have a student recently who was asking for very minimal accommodations, and his documentation was just a little bit old, and they did accept it. So I know there's some leeway, but I have very limited information about that. Okay, will disability housing accommodations continue automatically, or do we need to reapply? They will continue automatically, and there are rare circumstances if someone has an accommodation for housing because they have a broken leg, it would be temporary, but those are very rare circumstances. So typically, if it is an ongoing condition, their accommodation will automatically apply going forward. Someone asked if we have a way to connect a student with dyslexia to a current UMD student to ask questions. So we do not. It's very tricky due to privacy issues, but we do want to find ways to build community within, but between students. It's very difficult. And the other thing too is that right now the demand is very high for accommodations, and we're really focused on that. But our department is rapidly expanding, and we're hoping as we expand, we'll have a greater ability to build community. So I'm hoping that there will be a way for that in the future. But once again, it is tricky due to privacy laws as well. Someone asked what diagnosis would allow for a note taker, and can this be petitioned since their son was not given a peer note taker. So I'm going to multi-parts to this. So there's no specific diagnosis that gets someone any particular accommodation. We evaluate each student individually, and we offer accommodations that are appropriate for their specific needs. When it comes to peer notes is not a great accommodation from an access standpoint, because we're very reliant that it's just another student in the class. So they might be absent sometimes, they might, stop taking notes, their notes might get better or worse throughout the semester. It's a really, sometimes it's necessary, but it's not a great accommodation. I'm assuming that the student has requested note-taking support. And if that's the case, they likely were given access to audio recording. So audio recording is our first line of defense when it comes to note-taking issues. And when we give them this accommodation, we also give them access to a program called Glean. And Glean is an incredible program. It allows students to record audio, and then they can type in notes that are automatically synced with their timestamped within the audio. They can take a picture of the board, and that automatically syncs with the audio. They can sync the PowerPoint slides with the audio. It also will give them a transcript of the lecture, and the transcripts are very, very accurate, and they're searchable. So students, say they want to look up, a certain term, they can find that within all of the lectures. They can find every place in all their lectures where that term came up. It's a really, really great program. So typically that's the accommodation that we're going to go with. And then if a student requests, if they say this isn't working for me, what we'll do typically is connect them with our note-taking unit. Our note-taking unit is really great at figuring out how Glean can work better for a student. And then at that point, if they determine, okay, there's a kind of an odd scenario where it's not working, then at that point, we'll discuss adding a peer note taker. So it's pretty rare, those instances where a peer note taker is needed or is better than having Glean. But it is something that we consider. So the student can, ask their disability specialist and let them know if there's some reason why Glean wouldn't work. And then ultimately, if they disagree with the decision, they can petition it. There is a place on our website. If you Google like UMD ADS appeals process, you'll be able to find it. Or if you click around on our website, you will find the appeal process. And there's a form that can be completed that will be reviewed by our leadership team. Okay, so now I'm ready to answer any additional questions that anyone has. And I'm going to stop my screen share. So.
Thank you, Hannah. So for folks who are on computers, I was putting some websites in the chat. So Hannah referred to the registration application as well as their website. So I put those links in the chat. I also did a quick search on any students with disabilities communities or resources, and so there is a page on the president's website that has a few student organizations. I'm not sure how active they are. They can be active one semester and then not as active the next semester, so I would encourage students to look into that if they're wanting to find community. And then also the Glean resource, which I had never heard of, which it seems pretty awesome. So I looked at that as well and put that in the chat. And then later today, when I send out the survey, and thanking you all for attending today. I'll make sure these links are included in that as well, so you have it in case you're not able to save it from the chat. And so let me pull up the questions. Monica was doing great with answering all the questions as they came through. Oh, and another reminder is I did a webinar a couple months ago with Succeeds and Cigna. And so if you are interested in those programs, definitely go visit the Terp Family YouTube channel, and you can review the webinar that I did with those two programs. So Hannah, I know you mentioned the housing accommodations and how long those are in effect for, but for academic accommodations, are those also in effect for long term, or do students need to apply regularly for those?
Great question. So there are, once again, if they have a temporary condition, then those accommodations would expire. And if the temporary accommodation or the temporary condition was continuing longer, they would need to submit, additional documentation to say, hey, I still have, concussion symptoms or whatever it is. And then if they don't have complete documentation and we give them temporary accommodations, those would expire. Otherwise, if it is a permanent condition and we have all the documentation we need, those accommodations are going to last for their entire time at UMD. If they come back for grad school, they're still going to be in the system. They don't have to reapply and say, like, I still have ADHD or whatever it is. But at the same time, we're always happy to meet with students if they need to adjust their accommodations. The things they need to do every semester are sending that accommodation letter to their instructors and talking to their instructors about the logistics.
Thank you. The other question that just came through the Q&A, has Glean worked for students with dysgraphia?
Yes, so it's a great accommodation for students with dysgraphia because it not only does it provide you the whole lecture, it provides the whole thing, all the information, but you can, one of the things you can do if you can type notes within the app, but even I know with dysgraphia, even that is difficult sometimes. So you can do things like mark something important or say, this is important, I need to come back to that. Or you can mark something as that needs to be reviewed where you're saying, okay, this is going to be something I need to process more. So there's so many things you can do within the program that allow you to note take without having to write notes.
Thank you. This other question came through, and I'm not sure I fully understand it, but you may have a better understanding of it. Does UMD offer priority registration as a disability accommodation? Well, I guess registering for classes. Yes, I understand it now more that I read it aloud.
Yes, we do. So priority registration is definitely an accommodation we give out. Some of the reasons why someone might use priority registration is if they have a medication that is only effective during certain times of the day and they really need to take their classes when that medication is effective. If they have an accommodation that benefits from them registering early, for example, if they have an accommodation for audiobooks, it's good if they can register early because that way we have more time to get their books ready for the next semester. Also, if they have extended test time, we will give them priority registration so that they can kind of space their classes out so that the test time fits better into their day. Doesn't always work out, but we can kind of give them a leg up by letting them register early. And I will say that's something that changed recently. We did not used to give priority registration to all students who had or had extra test time. So when students are coming in now and we give them extra test time, we give them priority registration. But if you have a student who's been here for a while, they're welcome to reach out to us and we can add priority registration as an accommodation if they already have extended test time.
Thank you. The next question is there a deadline for spring consideration for housing accommodations?
Good question. I don't, not that I'm aware of, I don't believe we have a specific deadline. There is a deadline in, for fall, but with spring, I would just get it in as soon as possible. And I will say that the deadlines are, there's no actual deadline, because we can't have a deadline for, someone could acquire a disability anytime. Someone might realize they need an accommodation that they didn't realize before. However, it's always good to get things in early, because the thing with housing is that there's limited space. So we might say, oh, this would be a great accommodation for you to have. And then Res Life might say, we don't have that space. That does not exist, or there's no availability. So while I don't believe, Monica, do you know of any deadline for spring housing accommodations?
No, I was just on Resident Life's website. They said November 19th for returning student agreement form. So I would, yeah, if you want housing accommodations or are interested in that process for your student, I definitely recommend filling that out with our office as soon as possible. And Resident Life takes all of that into consideration when assigning housing.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that information. That's helpful. Yeah, so I would just try to get it in as soon as possible. If you have questions about it, well, you can ask us now, but also if you have more questions as you're filling it out, ask us so that you can get those answered quickly. And because it's complicated with housing, since we have limited space, as opposed to, we can give an unlimited number of students extra test time, but we can't give an unlimited number of students a private bathroom, for example.
I did do a webinar with Resident Life earlier this week, and this would be helpful for the next academic year housing. So if your student may need accommodations for their 2024 to 25 living space, I would recommend doing it when the housing and dining agreement is due. So making sure that it's included in that, which that's in February. So late February. But for the spring semester, I would recommend you contacting them now to see what rooms they still have available.
And I'll add to, for registering for next fall, that priority deadline is typically in June. So it would be great if you could do it in February, but you have until it's in June. It will be set. If it's not set already, it'll be set later. It was June 17th, I believe, last year. And that is the deadline when Res Life can guarantee that if the space exists, they can have it available by move-in in August.
Correct. And I think we answered this one, the academic accommodations, if they need to be applied for or renewed every year, and that answer is no. And even if you leave, you're still in the system when you come back, so they'll be available for you. Those are all of the questions that have either not already been responded to verbally or responded to by Monica. Hannah or Monica, is there anything else you want to add before I wrap us all up?
I think I've covered all the things I wanted to cover today. Monica, do you have anything to add?
No, that's it as well. I hope everyone found this informative and, will share ADS services with their students, and then we'll help as much as we can once they get here.
Yes, and please contact us if you have any questions. If you have students who are thinking about getting accommodations and don't know where to start, they can set up a consultation appointment with us, so they don't even have to fill out all the registration forms and everything to get an appointment with us. If they want to just ask questions and figure out where to start, you can also set up an appointment to have a consultation. You can set up a consultation appointment with us as well. So please don't hesitate to contact us if you have any additional questions. And I really appreciate everything you do for your students.
Thank you both so much. Thank you all for taking time to join us this afternoon. If you have any remaining questions, please reach out to ADS and they will be happy to assist. As I mentioned before, I will be sending an email out later today, letting you know where you can find the recording from this webinar, as well as the survey. And so I really hope you will take that survey, let us know how we did, how we can improve, and if there are any other topics you'd like to learn about. I always enjoy connecting with my campus partners to bring this information to you all. So let me know if there's other departments you'd like to learn more about. And the links also that I shared within the chat feature, I will also include those in that email. So as a reminder, you're going to get all of this information as well as a recording of the webinar later today or early tomorrow. So thank you all again for joining us today, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.